In yesterday's reading from the Epistle of James, the writer leveled a blistering charge at the wealthy members of the church, especially those who used their position as members of the church to take unfair advantage of their workers, particularly those who were also members of the church. Now the writer, in effect, turns to face the rest of the congregation, the majority of whom are poor and vulnerable, and he offers them words of consolation and hope. Let's see what he says to those who've been quietly suffering at the hands of their wealthy fellow believers. Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas, and this is your daily devotional for Friday, September 5th, 2025. In today's environment, people who are being cheated by their bosses either cry out in protest or file lawsuits to seek to make things right. And they should. But the Roman Empire in the first century worked differently, very differently. There weren't protections for workers. No OSHA to make sure workers worked in safe conditions. No EEOC to make sure workers weren't treated differently based on irrelevant factors like race or gender. None of the protections we have come to expect and take for granted, in which, by the way, generations of Christians fought hard to implement. No, in the time when the Epistle of James was written, workers were pretty much subject to the whims of employers. As I pointed out yesterday, ironically in the church, wealthy members of the church could and did take advantage of other members of the church in employment, knowing that because they were fellow members of the body of Christ, they were not likely to protest, at least not very loudly. That's what James addressed in the passage we read yesterday. In today's passage, he gives advice to those workers seeking redress of their grievances. But instead of urging them to go on strike or to man the barricades, he offers a surprisingly soft approach. He says, "Be patient, therefore, beloved, until the coming of the Lord. The farmer waits for the precious crop from the earth, being patient with it until it receives the early and the late rains. You also must be patient. Strengthen your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is near. Beloved, do not grumble against one another, so that you may not be judged. See, the judge is standing at the doors. As an example of suffering and patience, beloved, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Indeed, we call blessed those who show endurance. You have heard of the endurance of Job, and you have seen the purpose of the Lord, how the Lord is compassionate and merciful." Well, as blistering as James' condemnation of the wealthier members was, this is a surprisingly, some might even say disappointingly mild bit of advice to those members who are being taken advantage of by other members. Be patient. Do not grumble. Do not judge. Endure. What is that about? Well, it boils down to this. It's a matter of trust. In yesterday's reading, part of the writer's blistering attack on the folks who were taking advantage of the poorer members was the warning that they would suffer God's judgment. So now, his advice to those poorer members is a question of trusting that God's judgment will indeed come. So, if one believes that God is truly the judge, that God's judgment is imminent, and that God can be trusted to carry out God's judgment, there's really nothing else one needs to do. Trust God and be patient. The part of me that yearns for a more just and equitable world, a world in which the poor are not taken advantage of by the wealthy and the powerful, bridles just a little bit at this. But here's the deal. There was every expectation in that community that God's judgment was indeed imminent. The expectation in the Christian church is that Jesus would return, and very soon. It followed that one should be patient and could be patient, knowing that wrongs would soon be righted. So, is there a takeaway for us? Does this mean we should never cry out for justice for the poor? Does it mean we should be passive in the face of injustice, whether we are the victims of injustice or advocates for those who are? No, of course not. But it does mean that whatever justice we can seek out now is always only partial and incomplete. It is only an approximation of the justice that will come when God's kingdom is finally complete. For now, even our best efforts are only a dim reflection of God's ultimate reality. And that's worth waiting for. Tomorrow, where is our comfort in life? But for now, may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.